welcome to Sense Space. My name is Jacob Gashir. I'm the host, director, explorer of these dialogues, and today I'm sitting down with Samuel Barnes, who is a philosopher and writer, and really a peer across the world, someone who is somehow on a very different but similar track. And I feel there's some interesting similarity in our journeys. Mine has led me from the UK to Mexico after some years dawdling around in Germany, and Samuel's has led him to Korea. And I wanted to start off by just exploring that call to go beyond where one is born from, and that sense of like a moreness, like something beyond where you already are, something that calls you to a horizon. Because I was reflecting and talking recently with a friend about like, the challenges also involved in like moving away from your homeland, being distant from your family, being distant from your cultural context. Like all of the richness also can come with some sense of displacement as well. But the thing I said to her was like, if I was fully content, if where I grew up really felt like the Shire, I probably wouldn't have ever felt the need to sally forth. And ultimately, my sallying forth didn't even feel like a choice. It just felt like the logical consequence of who I am was to take the next step and end up in London, and then from there, the next step and end up somewhere else. And so, in a sense, I feel sort of a thrownness in the Heideggerian way. Like I'm just thrown um, into this kind of journey and displacement. And I would love to hear a little bit from you about what comes up in relation to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good reflection, particularly what you said about the concept of home and particularly the Shire. I think maybe we're already poking at one of the problems with the ideology of the zeitgeist. But I think what we're about to say, I think it doesn't apply to most people. I think most people have a home. Most people feel at home intellectually, whether it's what they're doing for work, whether it's their family, whether I feel like there's a reason why the majority of people aren't nomadic. There's a reason for this. And I don't think that should be looked down upon at all. I mean, maybe this is the same for you, but for me personally, the reason why I'm in Korea is that, and this, honestly, looking back on it now, it's strange because it follows on from my previous philosophical book, which was work on skepticism and kind of the limits of philosophy. And, if you were to get all literature analysis on it, I suppose it's on the theme of homelessness in a way, right? And I've always felt a certain homelessness, whether that's because growing up I moved around a lot in the UK, but it's I moved to Korea about almost 2 years ago now, and the reason why I did is I knew that I didn't want to continue with the career I was doing. I knew that the relationships I had in the UK had kind of spent themselves in terms of myself changing and other people changing and these sorts of things. There's obviously the tough economic situation that the UK is in, which I think is probably one of the, beyond any cultural problems, I think is actually probably the biggest issue that people don't talk about enough. But the weirdest, I mean, all these things kind of come together. And again, looking back on it retrospectively, it is weird how my intellectual work mirrors what was going on in my personal life. It's very strange. But because I'd never been to Asia before, and I got jobs I had opportunities in a bunch of different East Asian countries. And, reflecting on the economic stuff, I actually consider myself incredibly fortunate to have as many opportunities as I do have, even still. the fact that you can just choose a country and go live there pretty much. I feel pretty fortunate to have that ability. But I chose Korea because it was the country I knew the least about. Sounds a bit silly. I think I might be the only person who's moved to Korea who didn't like K-pop or something like this, right? Like the majority of expats who move here are basically women who really like K-pop or idol or something like that. So I'm a bit of a,
Okay.
again, going back to the theme of homelessness, even among the expat community, I'm a bit of an odd duck, I think. And it's a real cliche, but I have kind of fallen in love with this country, and particularly the city I'm in now. There's lots of reasons for that. I mean, we can have a long conversation about or my understanding of Korean culture. I don't know how interesting that would be, but yeah, I think it is interesting how my iconoclastic intellectual work was sort of like an intellectual homelessness. And I think, yeah, for me at least, the search for a permanent home still continues. And I think that's exciting. But yeah, I think it's one of the problems with today's ideology is that, you know, the liberated individual is supposed to be someone who travels a lot. And traveling is usually, you know, a weekend away somewhere or a couple weeks somewhere. And basically what amounts to culture for this is basically, you know, eating their food, and that's pretty much it. Maybe seeing some of their sites, and that's what it amounts to.
Yeah.
In my life, I've been to lots of places, but I've always had the most enriching experience when I've stayed for at least a month. And there's been a number of countries where I've done that. But the longest periods I've spent is I studied for a year in Germany, and now obviously I've been for 2 years in Korea. And I feel like anyone out there who's doing traveling, going to a place for a weekend or a week or two and wondering why it feels empty. I mean, going to a few restaurants and seeing some castles is not really experiencing a place, in my opinion. There's a lot there. I was wondering what that sort of up for you.
Yeah, right there with you on that. I mean, I talked before on the podcast about the distinction between tourism and pilgrimage, as like one way to approach this. Tourism being maybe more of a consumptive, superficial mode of encountering the other, and pilgrimage being like a sense of like a journey of discovery and a possibility of mutually transformative encounter, like being changed by what you encounter, which means on some level, like you have to be receptive to it, you know, and sometimes cultural conditioning can actually make you very closed to encountering the other. And you can kind of see that, like, there are people who travel in a way where they can really meet the other, and there are other people where it's like the encounter is more limited. And of course, when you live somewhere and you learn a language, you spend every day with these people, you have these chance encounters, you really start to get more of a feel for people. And you learn something about humanity through them, and you also know yourself through how you're received by them. So I almost I actually got a Gene Keys reading the other day from a friend, and if you're not familiar, Gene Keys is kind of it's a little bit like human design, or a little bit more scientific than an astrological reading, but it's a kind of system of reading your character profile, let's say. Anyway, one of my gene keys was like sort of like identity mutant, like constant mutation in encounter. And I thought that was very fitting. And that's kind of how it feels for me, is like I go to these cultures and then there's like something in the DNA of the culture that connects with my DNA, and it like
Yeah.
awakens something in me that's latent, or some realization, or it deepens something, or it like kind of conflicts and rubs against something that brings it to life. Um, and so definitely, I mean, for me in Mexico, there's a certain sensuality. I feel there's a certain um, also like there's maybe part of the machismo culture and more of like the aggression and the context of violence. Um, Not necessarily that I've been encountering a lot of violence directly, but it's definitely felt like an environment that's brought out more of my masculine side. Like I for years was thinking about, oh, I really ought to try and do some like MMA or some martial arts type training. But it was only when I was vacationing. There you go. There's another touristy word. When I was traveling to visit Colombia is when I finally worked up to it and went in a boxing gym in like Medellin. And it just felt like way more suitable somehow to be in like Latin America and go in a fight gym anyway. So and here in Mexico is where I've actually finally like built up to like go once a week, and now build up to twice a week, and I'm like really actually engaging that side of myself. So there's many pieces to it. Also going to the my whole relationship with Christianity and churches was transformed a lot by being in other cultures and experiencing Christianity through another cultural lens. You know, dating, encountering women through another cultural lens. There's all these different components to it, but yeah, that search for a home is really a deep question, and one that some would say only is really answered by relationship to the divine, and the eternal things is where home is found. Um, but then on a very based level, it's like home is the place where you've gotten your shit together enough to be able to commit and partner with a woman and create a family as well.
Mm.
At least for me, like that's also some part of my maturation during these past few years has been coming to a place where it's like, yeah, like, you know, I still have that dog in me, like pretty much every man seems to until his deathbed. But like with greater primacy now is the clarity of like, yeah, I do actually want commitment and partner and children. So, but you know, prior to having that, you're still just a solo dude living in a foreign land. So it's there's always a little bit of a question mark, and there's always a possibility of, well, I could go somewhere else, or it could be somewhere else, and that can be exciting, and it can also be undermining in a way as well. It can undermine that sense of like givenness, like the people you described who never leave have. There's a sense of just like it's a given that I'm here.
Yeah.
Once you've inserted the question and possibility of something else, it's almost always there.
Yeah. I mean, just from a practical perspective, if you can kind of evolve yourself as a person, because, you know, there are still some things I do. I still act in English ways, but there are certain like parts of Korean culture, or the way you go about your life, or the way that you interact with people, that I think will change you forever. You can take on what's good and what works for you, and you can kind of leave what you don't like. And I mean, speaking on the subject of the rough with the smooth, I think a good barometer for whether someone's actually lived somewhere. And I mean, someone can be somewhere for a year and not actually have lived there. Usually when people are like, oh, everyone's so friendly, that's usually bullshit, because if everyone's so friendly, usually that person's just interacted with service workers.
Uh-huh. That's,
If you
yeah,
actually
that's
meet
a good
people,
point.
know people, you realize that, okay, even though, I don't know, this is the stereotype, you can tell me if it's wrong or not, but Latin Americans are more naturally outgoing, less anxious, all these sorts of things, right? Like maybe them generally would be seen as more friendly, right? Um,
Yeah, at a general surface level, it's more warm and there's more of a just greeting people in the street would be one of those things that I've taken on. Like
exactly,
you
right?
say it to strangers all the time. Yeah.
But you could probably attest to the fact that you scratch beneath the surface. Turns out they're people as well. And some of them are more pessimistic than others. Some of them are more optimistic than others. So I don't know.
Yeah.
That's generally the barometer, is if someone's like glowingly positive about a people or a place and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe that's a honeymoon period also, you
Yeah.
know, like
But
before.
I kind of like the extremeness of Korean people because there's like this there's like two archetypes that people fit into. Is they're either, that guy who sung Gangnam Style, Psy?
Yeah.
They're
Yeah. I
either
know that.
him or they're Kim Jong-un. There is like no in between. They're either like full K-pop or like complete like by the books, bureaucracy, tradition, rules sort of people. It's fascinating.
Okay. Interesting. I have so little cultural reference for Korea in general. Like I have kind of like I have my map of Japan. Like I kind of have like my Miyazaki to Japanese kamikaze spectrum. And I have also my Chinese kind of maybe like contemplative to communist spectrum. But for
Yeah.
Korea, like I have almost zero frames of reference at all. So I don't even know like where to begin with that. Like
I,
what would you say are the core
well, I
characteristics?
think one thing that was useful for me is like, the fact that I did, like I said, I chose it because it was the country I knew the least about. And I actually came in like I had like a complete cultural ignorance, number one, but also, again, I wasn't poisoned by the fact that, oh, I like K-pop or I like this idol, so I should move to this country. And then you assume that it's going to, I don't know, like people, it's a very common thing, especially young women. They say like, oh, I thought he was going to be like K-drama. Turns out it's real life with real people, right? But like you said, just being like someone who doesn't really know much, kind of, I feel like I was able to get to the core of the place quicker than someone who had priors, basically.
Hmm. I wonder if you've had an experience of like deepening relationship with yourself through being in like through kind of taking yourself and putting yourself in a long-term period in this other cultural environment that it somehow like I don't know, like it has this effect on your own psyche, like all the while you're kind of learning to speak the foreign language and participate in this new way and in a sense like discover this new like the Korean version of yourself that you embody in relation to Koreans. There's also like all of you like prior to being in the Korean language that exists kind of like underneath that. And so it's difficult to describe, but it does feel like there's a kind of um there's some kind of meditation in the like broader long-term version of it that occurs through immersing in a culture like this.
Yeah, I don't. I wouldn't consider myself. I mean, I've got a good amount of Korean friends for sure. I wouldn't consider my knowledge of the language good enough to say I'm um, enlightened in that way. Although from what I know already, there are noticeable difference in the way the language is organized, in the way that um, formality works in grammar as well. Very interesting differences, but um, I mean, I don't really know what to say because I don't know how it would have been different if it had gone differently. I don't really know that. But what I do know is that when I was in England, I was either in London, which was a completely deracinated place,
Yeah.
or I was back in my hometown where everyone knows me, but there's no opportunity. And I think going to a completely new place was, an exciting opportunity for me, just generally as someone who felt a bit stuck in lots of ways, but also was the fact that, you meet expats as well, and you meet
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
Korean people, Korean friends, and you have to figure, because you don't know this person. And also, when it comes to being an expat, usually there's kind of like more limited pool. You don't have that choice paralysis. You've got like a limited pool of groups and people you can talk to and that sort of stuff, right? Um, so you really have to think like, oh, how am I going to like introduce, who am I? How am I going to how would I introduce myself to a completely new person that I probably want to get along with, because there's a more limited group of people here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Well,
helped me
I encounter the
realize
same,
who I was.
but I almost think there's something enabling in that choice. Like that lack of choice is quite enabling as well, because it just like it, especially, I mean, Oaxaca is a very small city. It's kind of got a city with a pueblo town kind of energy. And yeah, the lack of people actually makes the choice easier in a way, because it's just like there's not that sense of just like zillions of people around to choose from. It's like the people who are here are the ones who are here, and they were called here for a reason. um and so yeah, less choice actually has been in some ways supportive, I would say.
And that's ancient wisdom as well, is that if you really want to see someone destroy themselves, you give them everything they want. It is a weird, strange contradiction in human nature that, and people who um, go through religious conversions where they have to commit to something, or even something like a 12-step program for addicts where they have to kind of admit they're powerless over something and they don't have a choice in something. It's strange how people consistently report feeling more free and more liberated after doing this. It's a strange paradox in human nature and, human spirituality, but I think different aspects of people's lives as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the biggest dangers. I think one of the biggest traps for us is what Byung-Chul Han calls excess positivity, but just like an abundance of choice and a total lack of boundedness in anything. Boundedness in attention, boundedness in commitment, boundedness in identity, boundedness in relationship. Like all of these things seem to be at a saturation point of dissolving those things, and it doesn't necessarily make you more happy. There's definitely a recognition. Ken Lowry, I don't know if you know Ken, but he's been part of the kind of meaning web, John Viveki, Pajau kind of sphere of the conversation space that we've been both a part of. And he was the one who turned me onto this idea also of just like freedom through responsibility, freedom through commitment. And as I've kind of taken on the reality of like, okay, I haven't found myself in a traditional career path, and it's not obvious that I'm going to be plugging into one anytime soon. I actually need to build this for myself. And I came to the realization recently that it's sort of like Bob Dylan's song, like you have to serve somebody. Like you either kind of like create the, like if you're a small business owner or you create something yourself, you become like a servant to whatever you create. It starts to like you direct it, you have more choice in that sense, but ultimately like you have to serve that thing or you serve something else. But there's no like, it doesn't feel like there's a pathway of not being kind of like devoted and rendered unto some greater commitments. Um, And so it's really about choosing which ones to be rendered unto. It feels like,
Yeah.
um,
And that's a important philosophical realization, is that I think that, even those people we're talking about who are perfectly happy staying in the Shire and being hobbits, um, everyone, even hobbits have that God-shaped hole. Everyone has that God-shaped hole, and you've got to. That's the thrownness of life, is you have to put something in that hole. And frankly, it's the decision. The difficult decision is not whether you have a God or not. It's deciding which one is going to be a useful and productive God to have. Um, and this is very confusing to the liberal brain. Basically, this is very confusing to the liberal brain
I want to
because
take you up I want to take you up on the words useful and productive here, though, because that feels like not the highest expression of what, like, it's like,
yeah, it
what is
sounds like
the,
I'm
to me,
talking
it's
in
more
a
like, what is
right. It sounds like I'm talking
what
in a
is the
utilitarian sense.
what's the
But something can be
fulfilling?
useful and productive in a spiritual sense as well. It doesn't have to be
Uh-huh. Yeah.
off the top. That's not what I was getting at.
Okay.
Uh, but yeah, I think that it's very confusing to a liberal brain who thinks that um, being able to have either interchangeable gods or no god at all, like no limiter to anything, is very confusing to the zeitgeist. And it's, again, this is why I use the words useful and productive, because you see lots of people who have been infested by this liberal consumptive culture, and they claim not to have a god, or maybe they have interchangeable gods, but they are the sort of people that do this tourism we were talking about. They have these interchangeable gods where they're swapping things out. They're doing, they love Pilates one week. They like traveling the next week. This all moves around, and then um, they need to buy something, or they need to have some sort of subscription, and they think that's freedom. They think that kind of choice is freedom, but they know, and people on the outside can see that there is something deeply missing there, or there's something not useful and productive. Um, and that's a lie. That's a lie told by our culture that does deep and profound damage to people. And I would argue, as the millennials get older and older, has actually ruined people's lives. This is why ideas are important.
Say more about that consequence that you're pointing towards.
Sure. To give, yeah, to come back to something we alluded to earlier, is the really obvious case is family for this, right? A really obvious
Yeah.
case is family for this, and not just the family you came from, but also um, there's a reason why this is such a powerful motivator for some people, particularly why once they have children, because there is something, innately biologically reproductive about us, right? So it's no surprise that this is if you're looking for a god, putting a family or a child in that hole is not such a bad idea. But I think there is a whole generation of essentially good, intelligent people who have removed themselves from a spiritual perspective, meaning by not having children. And number two, they've also removed themselves from the gene pool. One is very damaging from a materialist perspective. The other is what I was talking about when I was saying it's ruined some people's lives, basically.
So they've robbed themselves of some foundational meaning by basically writing off family until way, way later than all prior generations and their parents would have.
Or not
And
having
and then
children at all.
and then the gene pool, what you're talking there, I'm guessing about women, and probably about women who are not able to have children because of that choice. Or
Well, I mean, let's be honest. people from developed nations are having, actually, no, here's another myth as well. People are like, oh, people are having less and less children. That's not true. What has actually happened is the number of people not having any children has gone up.
Is that why? That's why the average is now two
Exactly, yeah.
or less.
People aren't really
Okay.
having smaller families than they were 100 years ago. It's that there are more and more people who don't have children. And yeah, to be
Well,
frank,
there are smaller families too, though, are there not? Because I feel like, I mean, in Mexico, for example, most people's grandparents had like 8 siblings. The parents maybe had 4
I
or
said
5.
developed nations for a reason.
Okay.
No offense to Mexico. I'm not dunking on Mexico.
Okay. Okay.
It's, and this ties into the issues of dealing with immigration, all that kind of stuff. But basically, people who have a higher, number one, a higher IQ, but also people with higher personality type conscientiousness are generally the sorts of people who don't have any children. And I'm not saying that everyone should have those qualities. I'm just saying it's reducing our human biodiversity, and that's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I believe because I think if otherwise left alone, these people would have followed generally would have followed the natural directive. There are like economic factors as well you could probably consider, but I think a lot of it is down to the liberal consumerist ideology, which is telling people that, liberation is to not have shackles, annoying shackles like having children, but being able to, on a whim, go on a weekend break and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that definitely gets at it. Maybe this is a interesting segue. I mean, you're wearing a cross today. You weren't wearing a cross last time we spoke almost a year ago. And I'm wondering if for you, just to kind of keep with the family thread here, like because what I observe for a lot of people is that this shift into some kind of reintegration of Christianity, at least in men, is often coupled with a shift in perspective around responsibility, family, monogamous partnership, and things like that. So I'm wondering if for you that has kind of you tracked that happening at the same time to some degree, or is it more been just your kind of your core spiritual orientation has been more the thing that's been shifting for you? And feel free also to share a little bit more just generally like why one of our greatest skeptics and rationalists has come to the
I don't think I don't think I ever claimed to be a
Christ's love.
skeptic. Yes, rationalist. I don't think so. I never claimed.
The lust of Hitchens' children has
Oh no, thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's so much in that. Is there can I have a specific question that I can answer? Because there's too much there.
yeah.
And I also don't understand it all fully, frankly. This is happening. This is a process that's happening beyond me and has been predetermined before I was even born. So I can only tell you what I know as the earthworm trapped in the matrix, so to speak.
That actually tells a lot. The way that you just framed that is really important to me because it resonates with a sense, and I think at this point a fairly objective observation that the movement of Christ and more broadly the movement of the reintegration and resurgence and renewal of Christianity is something that seems to be happening inside of us as individuals, but is also kind of a wave that is far greater than us, or it's like it just, I mean, I felt myself going through this process really deeply in 2022, going through a really intense personal crisis period. And that was where some of my deepest sort of revelations, if you will, towards the reality of this um, spiritual support available through Christ came online. And then lo and behold, like at the same time, all of these kind of like other voices in the network that I've been part of for years and years and years are like shifting in the same moment. And there's just something very curious about that, just in the context of the kind of the more liminal web space that you and I have been connected to, not to mention the broader cultural shift that is kind of ensuing afterwards. And so do you resonate with that sense that there is a kind of mysterious process that's occurring inside of us and outside of us, and maybe that even has implications for the notion of the individual as
Yeah.
well?
Yeah. I I want to caveat things with, and this is I think this is the truth that we have to caveat. There's a lot of talking online about, I don't know, Christianity rising, or people are in their swathes turning to orthodoxy, or some of all this aesthetic nonsense, pretty much. I would just put a caveat in there and say that I think our perceptions of what's happening in the wider culture is muddied by the sort of people that we're connected to. In terms of claiming a religious revival or anything like that, or any demographic movement from one denomination to the other, I would, maybe this is the skeptic in me coming out again, but I would defer to actual, statistical numbers on that stuff. I think a lot of what people say is muddied by the people they're connected to. I think it's very obvious when people probably spend a bit too much time online, and their perceptions of the outside world get really, really muddied. So that's one thing I just wanted to say to start with.
Mm-hmm.
But on the second point was really interesting, because you talked about maybe if this is, there is a religious revival or something going on, but I actually heard that as the fact that the religious revival is always been there. It's never gone away. It's always been there, and this is the way I've experienced it, because, and this is in scripture, is that God and Christ are, they're just waiting behind the door, and the door is always there, and you just have to open it. This like religious revivals happen all the time to individuals. And they usually happen in a very small context. And maybe again, this is my philosophical and political elitism coming out a little bit here. But again, it says so in scripture, the path and the gate are narrow, my friends. This is not for the hobbits.
Okay. Yeah.
Especially,
Well,
seriously, there's a lot written in scripture that's very difficult to do if you're a deracinated, liberal, liberated person. There's a lot that you have to change in your personal life. There's a lot of sacrifices you need to make if you take this stuff seriously. And none of it
sort of
involves posting aesthetic pictures on social media, I can tell you that.
sort of in the vein of the rich man entering the kingdom of heaven, I guess, in this sense, like the vestments of identity, the vestments of freedom, the kind of intellectual vestments. I keep saying vestments. I'm hoping listeners can look that up if they don't know what I'm, but just like baggage, clothing, the clothing of ideas that we carry. And ultimately, like, in a certain way, I feel there's a profound humbling. There's a profound humbling involved in coming into any kind of divine encounter, whether it occurs through a traditional Christian lens, or you have it at the peak of a mystical or psychedelically induced experience. Like, any kind of encounter of that kind is just like, it throws you on your knees. It throws you into tears to encounter something. It's eviscerating to your sense of self and separation, maybe, is a way that I would put that. And so that's what comes up to me when you talk about the
Yeah.
blocks. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've often felt like people talk about end times and the apocalypse, and there's something similarly perennial about that. Like, in a sense, the world. I've said many times, the world is ending the world is beginning and ending every day, because there are people being born and dying every day. So every single day, souls are incarnating into this world. Like, what the fuck is this? And every single day too, people are passing across the veil out of this plane of existence, and that is an apocalypse. So, but then we have this very, like, historical, teleological, like, no, it's actually going to happen in time. And I think I'm kind of agnostic about that, to be honest. But now we're getting real into the deep end of it. Um,
I need
and I
to, can I
want to,
respond to those 2 points?
please, but I also feel obligation to try and zero in further on your personal experience, because I don't feel like I've heard yet fully I mean, I've seen some of your reels and I've seen this more kind of like reflective content being transmitted, and I've deduced from that there's kind of a something unfolding in your contemplation and in your moments of solitude over the course of the last few years. And that's what
Yeah.
I'm also curious about.
Yeah. Um, I think what I wanted to say to what you were originally talking about is related to that second part. So, but yeah, you were talking about kind of, yeah, a powerlessness, right? And I think that is a core part of a Christian message, and it's mirrored in other spiritual traditions, whether that's traditional spiritual traditions, but it's also copied by, like I already mentioned, 12-step programs where powerlessness is a huge part of that. To relate that to my experience, and was revealed to me in scripture after it happened to me in real life, is that, the first step is having those ears to hear, right? And, perhaps that comes as a result of a deep philosophical skepticism, is the fact I had ears for everything. I had ears for everything. So I had ears to hear. The second part is related to the powerlessness, is giving your own will away. To relate it to what we were already speaking about, one of the poisons of the current culture is it's very much based away your individuality. What does you as a person, what do you want? What do you want to consume? What is your personality? Like, what is your identity that you can choose? You get to choose this. What's, I think, different for people who've gone through a genuine spiritual experience is they, as an individual, didn't choose this. It chose them. And I think this is why I think, in my understanding, Christianity is the truest of all of the perspectives that have that as a big part, because Christ himself is scared of what he's about to go through. He's terrified. He's sweating blood. He's begging the father to take this challenge away from him. He can't do it. But in the end, he says, not my will, but yours be done. Our God, our best example of who to be as a human is someone who is admittedly scared, but gives over their will to the Father. And that, for me, that was, after having ears to hear, that was the second step. Is litting this thing that wanted to choose me, the door that was always there, letting it work its magic. And you have to, people talk about ego death, especially people who, indulge in the substances you alluded to. But I don't think you always need something chemical to give you a real ego death. That's for sure.
Yeah, that was a powerful reflection of the character and experience of Christ, like receiving it through your words. And yeah, surrendering, giving up, offering up is an essential part of the Christian path, my understanding. That repetition, I mean, that is the fundamental prayer of Christianity, the Our Father, that thy will be done. And also, swiftly following that, on earth as it is in heaven, which for me is also a very radical notion of kind of like bringing two realms together. And there's something of a re-enchantment of the world that is also possible through this. I think that's part of the curious combination here when we think about what is a Christian or Christic shift in an individual's psyche have to bear on this like liberal consumptive worldview that we've arrived in is not just like the responsibility, the relationship to suffering, the sense of bearing a cross, bearing one's destiny maybe. There's also that re-enchantment, which is also, I can imagine, difficult for a skeptic to wrestle with too. And there are parts for me of there are things that are miraculous that I've come to sort of accept as true. And then there are other things that are miraculous that I'm like, I don't know what to make of that at all. But there are perhaps smaller ways. And I also want to broaden this conversation out because I think what we're really getting at here is like, what is the experience of sort of turning on to God? And that's something that can be observed in your direct experience day to day. It's something that I think is kind of elusive also, like it comes and goes. But that having ears to hear and eyes to see is not just about rendering your attention unto whatever priest or denomination says you should render it unto. It's about everything that happens in the other 23 hours of the day and the other 6 days of the week. And like being perceptive and receptive to some possibility that is outside of the ordinary scope of action and response and connection and relation. And so this for me is almost like a second layer on top of what we've already talked about of like what it means to be in a foreign culture and open oneself and become receptive to like new ways of being or behaving and showing up. Then when you kind of start to include that re-enchantment possibility there, things can get interesting. So I wonder what that brings for you.
Yeah. That's one thing I think Buddhism does get right is the focus on the present. It's a real focus on the present. And looping it back to something you already spoke about is the concept of apocalypse. And, Christianity does talk about apocalypse, but I think the misstep for lots of denominations, I mean, this is really obvious in lots of American strains of Christianity, is the focus on that apocalypse. But again, if you don't have to scratch too far to find the fact that, again, in scripture, it says that no one knows the day or the hour. Christ said this, no one knows the day or the hour. And that brings us back. So if you follow that train of thought, it's like, okay, the apocalypse is coming, but no one knows the day or the hour. So what option do we have but to focus on the present? And that really comes to what I feel like I'm in right now, which is past having ears to hear, past giving your will over to God. The third step is being really repentant. And I think that's a very important part of the Christian message, because this is the difficult part for many people with Christianity, is it does say that we're fallen creatures. It does admit that we're all broken in some way, deeply broken. And I think a big part of having genuine repentance for who you once were and who you still are in your faults, right, is the fact that, okay, like you said, every day is kind of like a mini apocalypse. Like, even, as a real follower of you're properly following any spiritual tradition, you do sort of think that, okay, in the here and now, how can I follow my ideal in the best way? But that also relates to the fact that, okay, maybe I messed up yesterday, but today I can go forward with, the world has ended and the world started again, come forward with fresh eyes, and I can try my best. Because we have to do that as humans. We have to do that. Otherwise, you end up with a world where people get defamed and maybe their entire family is also shunned. And those are obviously not productive ways of existing, right?
Can you elaborate just a little bit more on what repentance means? Like, is it in this context about getting honest about one's shortcomings and then rendering those into kind of grace of divine witnessing, and thereby kind of not carrying that baggage and just going forward afresh?
It's
Obviously,
both.
that's a simplification, because some repentances probably require long, kind of complex fractal processes to undertake. But yeah, what does repentance mean for you?
For me, I mean, for me, it's both things. It's both things, but a big part of my belief, I suppose, is that to be truly repentant, you need to believe it in your heart, but you also need to, again, this is why I'm talking about the present, is that you need to move forward in a way that's different.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't say sorry unless you mean it, basically. And you can don't tell me, show me, right? I feel like God has this approach, and not in the sense that feeling like being sorry in your heart, but then making a mistake. I feel like, because God is omnipotent, He understands that, I think.
But action is very important in
I
that.
think so. And again, I think this to reflect on, especially American Christianity, is, I think this is where, this ties into issues of scripture alone and by faith only being saved and this sort of stuff. I feel like if you are genuinely repentant, you will also change your ways as well, in some way.
Mm. I'm curious where you feel is the right place to go next in the conversation.
No,
Because we had a third section here, but I'm also like I'm unclear how we go forward from this
yeah, I don't know if the first topic
contemplative
is really
thread.
relevant to what we're talking about now. That's for sure. What is your experience? What is your experience with Christianity in Latin America? I'm very curious of this.
For me, it's been very positive to be in a place that is deeply, deeply Catholic, actually, despite having grown up feeling the Catholic Church is more or less the epitome of kind of corrupt
Yeah.
authority. Um, I found relief in a sense of like almost being like enwrapped within something supportive to be in a culture where I know that this faith has impact in the collective awareness, even for people who do not follow and participate in it. Um, One of the experiences that kind of triggered an interest in reaching out to you again was reflecting on like approaching faith through a foreign language as well.
All right.
My friend Jordan Bates, also in Germany, has been having this experience when you start going to church, perhaps for the first time as an adult in a foreign language, you experience the Mass in a totally different way because you're bereft of the kind of clarified like word by word doctrinaire aspect of the religion, and you really are much more aware of the architecture, the experience of being in the collective body, which for me I really rate. And especially like, you know, when I've gone through periods where I didn't feel integrated, where I didn't feel super connected, like to go and be in a mass has been a kind of medicine for me. Um, and it does make me think a little bit about the medieval Christian experience of going to Latin mass and not speaking Latin, you know, just really zoning in on the mysteries. And that's probably that's got to be the core thing that's had me going back to the mass at Santo Domingo Cathedral is like this newfound insight into the Eucharist. Um, Initially, I think partly brought on by dialogues that I had, you know, in this format with OG and Ken Lowry, and then also reading Tolkien's words about the Eucharist that he wrote to his son, um, in which he describes the Eucharist as like this kind of like site of like glory and richness and like almost like almost like heroism and romance, and like it kind of describes it like everything can be found in the Eucharist. And I'm willing to take something on if someone I really respect and admire says it, and to try it out. And so I've been doing that. And I also feel like actually in a strange way going to participate in ayahuasca retreats, and with the ayahuasca medicine there's a very, very clear ceremonial container and procedure and flow to the whole experience that kind of opens and closes it. I start to feel there was some kind of fractal overlap for me of the experience of going and sitting with everyone and contemplating and going, receiving, you know, ingesting my ayahuasca, going, sitting, having my experience, and then having the kind of container be closed and released. And when I go to the mass, there's a very lightweight but also deep version of that. And when the priest rings the bells and everybody kneels down, I don't just think like I did as a child, like, this is fucking ridiculous. They're ringing a bell and pretending that this bread is turning into the body of Christ. I think this is a portal. This is a portal to contemplate the mystery of incarnation in the present moment. And there's something about sound that just feels like it's not bounded by temporal laws. It feels like outside of normal time when I'm in there. But yeah, it's not easy. I definitely have sometimes I go to mass and it's a fucking struggle. And I sit there and I'm like, I want to get up and leave. This is not doing it for me. And I've kind of just made it a practice. Like once I'm in, I'm going to sit it through and I'm going to get through to the bread and I'm going to get through to the end. And I always feel better when I do. But sometimes I'm resisting it all the way through. So, yeah, I don't know. That's been the core for me. And I've had a few chats with people in the congregation, but I'm still in a way like I'm in a mass, but I'm not of the mass. And I shake hands and we do all the things, but I'm not like having that many close friendships and conversations with these people. And if I did, I'm sure we would begin to uncover a lot more difference in understanding because my understanding is very different, unavoidably so. But we share something in common, which is orientation towards the divine.
I think my experience might be interesting because I've never sat through I've never sat through a service in Korean, never ever. But when I started going back to church, it was number one because I had ears to hear. I was kind of curious and willing. But it was number two because they have an Anglican cathedral in Seoul.
Interesting.
And so in a way, I went for like a little miniature taste of home, even though there's some differences in the liturgy and stuff, but it feels Anglican. It feels Anglican.
Okay.
And so that's when I started going back. And it's strange coming back to our original opening topic of home, because, I was familiar with like everything that was said. It felt a little bit like returning home because I remember being forced to go to Anglican services through school or through family and stuff when I was younger, and thinking it's just complete BS. But you go enough times and you become familiar with the Lord's Prayer, you become familiar with the hymns and stuff like this. It reactivated a latent part of my brain, like deep memories were unlocked by this. And it comes back to what I was saying, my sense that the door was always there. I feel like God is very, very patient, very patient. And these seeds were planted a long time ago. And the most magical thing for me is that I believe I was christened, but I've never been baptized. So I always took a blessing. I never took communion. I was there. And after a service, one of the fathers came up to me and like made a beeline for me after the service, and noticed that I was the only one who was just getting a blessing and not taking communion. Asked me a bunch of questions. Are you baptized? All this sort of stuff. I was like, no, I'm not been baptized. And then he asked me the question, he asked me, do you want to be? And that I didn't even realize it working in me at the time. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now, but I just stopped thinking about it. I gave my will over to God and just said yes. And it led to the most magical experience of my life, where I was baptized on Christmas Day in that cathedral. Everything just lined up. I just had to open the door,
Wow. That's a very striking image, especially that it's an Anglican cathedral in Korea.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Talk about coming home, right?
Yeah. I mean, that
So, yeah,
is so
I mean,
close.
you could be as skeptic as you want, but I mean, from a personal perspective, there's too many weird things going on in that situation. Too many weird things going on that I surrendered at that point. I was like, okay, I believe. There you go. I give up. Because this is, I wanted to say when you were talking about uh, skepticism, is that ironically, skepticism, the thing that arguably gave us the scientific method, is in a sense the least useful thing because it does lead to that whirlwind of doubt and basically something that you get a lot, especially on intellectual YouTube and podcast networks, where you just end up with that endless word salad where nothing is really agreed, but there are endless conversations. Milton talks about this a lot in Paradise Lost. There's a long section where it shows the demons and Satan. They're in pandemonium in hell, and they're all like bickering endlessly. And people think it was his reflection on the Enlightenment cafes of the time and salons, where there is no faith. It's just endless bickering all the way to the bottom.
Mm.
But yeah, I don't know. I am so thankful. I'm so thankful to God for the patience that he had for me. And also, yeah. And there's just the fact that, yeah, the patience, I was given a lot of patience. I was given a lot of patience.
Beautiful. God's got all the time in the world. It's interesting to me that like the different sort of frequencies of conversation feels very present to me in this, especially with the kind of backgrounded context of you and me exchanging about the UK and the immigration debate and just the kind of the popular buzz of the conversation and in the context of that bickering you described.
Yeah.
And it's so attractive to certain parts of the mind algorithmically, dopaminergically, perhaps even just like right on the next one, right on the next one. And on some level, I know the nature of the times we're living in. There is never going to be an end to crisis and attention grabbing controversial events. But my dopaminergic system or my limbic system doesn't understand that. My limbic system is still thinking like, oh, there's something really important. I need to look at this one. And then like I get sucked and then I spend several days detoxing and coming back to ground and coming back to a place where I can actually serve my higher values. And then another one comes in and I get jacked on that. And it's just like, oh, this is really important. It's really important that I sense make this new crisis, this new political issue. And and then it's like I don't even feel like, I mean, in a sense I'm not doing anything with that because I don't see a helpful way for me to actually participate at the level of mediating what's going on in the information, even though it's a fucking shit show. And even though I do feel like I could probably offer a more measured perspective to many of these polarized issues, I could hold different sides in tension and consider them. I could try and orient towards maybe some deeper values. But at the end of the day, that whole process of thinking through doing that, I always just end up like man, probably I would be of better service actually just like working at the level of relationality and dialogue and kind of like working at the wisdom level in a sense. And of course, like we need to work at integrating what's going on in the war of mind and the war of ideas and politics into a deeper grounding in what's important. But yeah, it just feels like I live with that tension, and I almost live with whatever part of me felt I was supposed to become like an intellectual warrior, and
Mhm.
that I'm supposed to be I'm supposed to be in that fight, and just like supposed to be bringing my like incisive mind to bear on this shit show.
That's a
And
noble
yeah,
thing. You want to use your talents for good, right? It's a noble thing. But I think that it gives you a lot of solace.
perilous.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of solace personally when you realize that um, God's kingdom is not of this world, really not of this world, and that all this bickering is is of people scrambling over what's left of the fallen state in a way. Um, I think you're touching on something that's going to affect everyone moving forward, especially, particularly, but also especially the hobbits, actually, because I think we're entering an attention era. Because the era we were just in was the information era. Computers were in the ascendancy, and the statistical points about what made you was the most economically profitable thing to be focusing on. That has shifted. I think we've already experienced that shift without realizing it. Is that you as an individual demographic, that's no longer the most valuable thing about most people. I think the most valuable thing in the reflection of the fact that we now have these predictive language models and we have generative knowledge where knowledge work up to the level of the average postgrad can be done through just predictive computation now, can be done by what people call AI. So for most people, particularly the hobbits, the most useful thing about you to the economy is the constant output of attention that you give. That's what the algorithm is designed to capture,
Yeah, are
maintain,
you
and
talking about
produce.
hobbits? Are you talking about people going to their jobs and giving attention to what their job tells them to do? Are you talking about
That's
all the other hours of the day when they're basically
that's that's
monetized
part of it.
attention?
That's part of it, but it's way more efficient for capital to capture attention by using an app and using a social media algorithm, and even more efficient for it to be using something that's in everyone's pockets that they defer to every time they feel a slight anxiety, as opposed to actually having to go to a building to do your job.
Hmm.
And the amount of useful labor that can be done by physical people it's never going to completely go away. I don't believe, not entirely, but it is going to be constrained and constricted by um, advancements in automation and robotics. I do think that's true. The most valuable, I think this has already happened. We just don't we haven't felt it yet. The most
Hmm.
valuable thing that most people produce is their attention. This is why the biggest
Yeah.
companies in the world are social media companies. This is why their algorithms are designed to optimize the amount of attention you give them, and also want to maximize the amount of attention you give their specific network of algorithms.
Hmm.
But this is a central point of my upcoming book, which will be out before the end of the year. So if that sounds like an interesting topic to you, anyone listening, go to my website, samuelbarnes.com, or follow me on Substack, barnes.substack.com. Sorry, shameless plug. Don't worry.
Well timed, yes, and obviously pertinent to the moment. I'm waiting a moment here because I feel like there's a thread through that I'm waiting for of like what we were just exploring of relationship to God, which is about there is an attentional basis to that. What
Yep.
what it means to be more deeply in communion is to be more deeply reoriented in one's attention throughout all parts of life and throughout all parts of the day, as my Christic ayahuasca maestro Remy the one would say, to have your eyes oriented towards God in every part of the day, to be the oracionista, to live in a state of prayer. And you're saying most of what our value in society and the economy has been like knowledge-based work, at least for like the broad, like lower to upper class bands, like artisans and craftsmen excluded. That's getting radically, radically wiped out by LLMs, transforming the economy before our eyes in ways we don't understand. And on the other side of that, you're saying that the value of our attention is something that is going to persist as an economic basis. Am I following that?
Yeah. And
Okay. And then, okay, so how do these two kind of come together?
So these two come together because we mentioned the God-shaped hole in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Always possess. It doesn't matter if you're an elf or a hobbit. It doesn't matter. The God-shaped hole is going to be there, right?
Or
We've
not.
also established that every human is producing this unit of attention constantly producing this unit of attention. Even when you don't want to, you're always producing attention. The wonderful thing, the liberating thing is you get to choose where you spend that attention. Now, the most convenient way to spend it is the things I've already mentioned, but there's other ways to satiate your mind and reduce anxiety. You can give your attention to prayer. You can give your attention to creating things. You can give your attention to trying to get to know the person you're sitting opposite from, as opposed to getting your phone out because you detect a strange lull in the conversation that makes you feel uncomfortable. There have been devices people have kept in their pockets for those sorts of moments. In Eastern culture, they're prayer beads, but in Catholic culture, they've got the rosary. There's many different ways to spend your attention. It could be on that physical object. If you need something to touch, you can do that. But that's the liberating thing, is you are still given a choice whether you want to engage with this.
Yeah. And so in that sense, there's something very, very unchanged about the
Yeah.
nature of the human condition. The choice of where to orient our hearts and eyes is always given to us, to higher and lower, to deeper and shallower. And one of the fun things that I feel is that we're kind of God inside of a kind of unimaginable work of art, and becoming more in alignment with the will of God, in a sense, is to more deeply appreciate and participate in that work of art. God didn't create the universe with the highest ideal being spending one's evenings alone, lost in the infinite wheel of scrolling, although that too is part of the divine reality. There's clearly differentiation in our world. There is more beautiful, there is more rich, and there is less rich and less beautiful. And we have a wonderful opportunity to help shape that.
The beautiful thing baked into this work of art is the fact that the truth and beauty and good and God is actually an unchanging foundation of it all. But the form that that takes is different in each era, but it rhymes in some way. I mean, a funny example is one of the earliest pieces of writing we have around the invention of writing. Obviously, the first thing is like, economic records. But another thing is a letter someone wrote, I think, complaining that all the young people today are too busy trying to write a book. And I suppose all the young people today are too busy trying to get popular on social media to start farming attention. So it all rhymes. That's the beautiful thing. It all rhymes. So you were able to reach back to the things that have persisted because they're ancient wisdom and they are relevant to all times, I believe.
A beautiful place to end the dialogue. Thank you, Samuel. It's been a delight. Could not have anticipated this conversation, but feels like exactly the one we were supposed to have. Cheers.
Cheers.